Welcome. Anyway, okay, so I'm gonna introduce Judy real quick. For those of you who don't garden with Judy, I will introduce her. She is the master gardener who was interested in participating in the park when the idea was presented to your master gardening group by Clark Keto in 2011. A sister city member who wanted to celebrate the 30th anniversary of our association with our Japanese sister city, Tokai-Mura. All right. Master gardener Judy Seydel has been recognized for her tireless effort in organizing the creation of the Idaho Falls Friendship Garden and Sportsman's Park. She received the National Award of Excellence from National Garden Clubs, the largest volunteer gardening organization in the U.S. The award is given to 2 people across the country annually and is only awarded to non-garden club members. It is a tremendous honor, says spokesman Gay Austin. This is our highest honor we give for work in conservation, beautification, and floral design. We selected Judy because she is a dedicated leader that was able to motivate those around her to help get things into place. And I think the garden in its current status is proof of that continued effort. This was her second National Award of Excellence because in 1990, the retired teacher received the Presidential Award of Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching, the highest honor bestowed annually by the federal government for K through 12 mathematics and science teaching. Well done. Seydel has spent a significant amount of time since her retirement on gardening projects such as Idaho Falls Friendship Garden, tirelessly working to make sure everyone can enjoy it. Oh, I introduced you to Judy Seydel, and she will be talking about the history of Pedersen, Sportsman's Park, and the development of Friendship Garden. Thank you.
Greetings, everybody. I'm glad to see so many people I recognize and so many people I don't recognize. So it's great to have you here. What I would like to do today is to give you a little bit of background of the island that we know as Pedersen Sportsman's Park, which is where the Japanese garden is located. I'm going to show some slides of that first, and then we're going to jump into the work that we have done on the island to develop a Japanese garden or an Asian style garden, but it's definitely a Japanese style garden. So with that, I'm going to, and I hope this works. Kim promised me if it works, it's good, and if it doesn't work, it's her fault. So I found this picture on the internet, and it's the clearest picture that I have ever seen of the island in the river. We can't really see the island well these days because of all the vegetation, but here is the island right here. And hopefully, I don't know. There are a number of things that I wanted to point out in this picture. First of all, the island doesn't have much vegetation on it. And that's because for a long time, there was no soil on it. It's all rock. But the housing projects and other building projects from the city, they bring the excess soil that they had over to the island, and eventually it was covered. A couple of other things that I wanted to show you. This is the first power plant on the river, and we're going to be talking about that. It does connect the island to the east bank of the river. Over here is the diversion dam that was built in 1910 by W.W. Keeper. Before 1910, this was not an island. It was connected to the east bank of the river, the east bank of the land, by a wash right in here. And when the river, which normally came along here, got really high in the spring, it would go around this end of the river and create the island in there. When Keefer built the diversion dam in 1910, the water was kept high enough to go through the power plant. And the island became a permanent island at that point. Interestingly, there's about 10% of the river that goes through this, the diversion part of it, and 90% of the river comes down here, and that is pretty narrow for 90% of the water coming through there. So, the wash up here is only about 10 feet deep, and the regular river is about 80 to 100 feet deep at that point. So it's, and it's pretty treacherous because of the undercurrents and so on. So we really don't encourage people to swim in that area. There's another interesting thing that I didn't know about. It over here is the Idaho Falls first railroad station for passengers. This is the railroad bridge, and this is Broadway right along here. This was taken about 50 years before the previous picture, about 150 years ago now. And this is the front end of the island with water going through the east side of the island, so you can see that. And this was probably taken in the spring because of the high water. And the thing I wanted you to notice was the rock. The island is rock. And they kept bringing dirt to the island for a long period of time. So we do have dirt to work with at this point in time. This next picture, I'm sure most of you have seen. This is not Taylor's first bridge. This was the second iteration because the first bridge was built on that level right there. And you will see in one of the pictures, the first June that the river or the bridge was up, it was washed away by the June floods. So Taylor rebuilt the bridge and he put it on these rock cribs. Also, here's one of the gates on one end of the bridge. It was a toll bridge, and Taylor charged the same fees as the Eagle Rock Ferry, which was upriver about 9 miles, but it was much more convenient here to cross the river. And in the mornings, people would line up to pay the toll and go on their way, and they would have a mile-long line waiting to cross that bridge. Then Taylor would collect in the neighborhood of $30,000 a year, which doesn't sound like an enormous amount, except in today's money, it's about $1 million a year. So he was doing quite well. But there was some clouds. There were clouds on the horizon, and that was the railroad. In 1869, I'm sure you all know that the East-West Railroad joined up in Promontory Summit in Utah, and people could get from the East Coast to the West Coast very easily. However, you couldn't get north or south. So the Utah and Northern railroads, and many other railroads, started building spurs to the north and the south. And this spur ended up in what by that time was called Eagle Rock in 1879. And it brought immediate prosperity to the area. There were a lot of jobs. The railroad put its workshops back here. And by 1884, the village of Eagle Rock had about 1,500 people. And then in 1887, the railroad pulled its buildings out and put them down in Pocatello, and the whole system collapsed. And the jobs just weren't there. The population dropped to about 500. So we almost lost it at that point. Notice back here is Taylor Bridge, but it's super reinforced from the last picture. The Taylor Bridge lasted, being reinforced over and over again. It lasted until 1889, and then it was taken down. The railroad ended up in Eagle Rock in 1875. And it was everything in terms of the prosperity, the jobs, everything just revolved around the railroad. When the railroad left and went back to Pocatello and the economy collapsed, they had to figure out something. Well, somewhere along the line, somebody figured out that the desert soil was extremely rich. And if you put water on it, it'd grow anything, as long as it had a short enough growing period. So the economy then switched over to an agricultural economy. And it was actually, I didn't know this until I started doing this, was one of the biggest agricultural economies and areas in the entire country at the beginning of the 1900s. This is my favorite picture. Edward.
I found it interesting in looking at some of this material a long time ago that Judy has. This is all occurring to Bridge, Taylor Bridge. I think he was a Virginian, as I recall. And he built the bridge because he was freighting up to Virginia City. And you already sort of ponder also the Virginia City. And why was all this Virginia stuff around? Well, it was right after the Civil War, and the South just got it added to it. And they're all looking for new places, new prospects. And so he came out here to freight to Virginia City and was also, and he built the bridge because he didn't like losing his wagons crossing the little ford. So anyway, that was part of the origin of the West in general, was the gold rushes and the into the Civil War.
Okay.
Sorry.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, I think this is my favorite picture of all the old pictures, because I look at that picture and think, if my husband had dragged me out here to a place that looked like that, after having come from the East Coast where everything was green, I think he would have been divorced immediately. And I would have gone back. But anyway, this is Idaho Falls around 1900. And by that time, the railroad had been, here's the railroad bridge, oops, here. The railroad had obviously been there for a little while, and the city decided that when the Taylor Bridge came down because it was condemned in 1889, and then it was dismantled, that the county wanted to put up a freeway. And so they commissioned W.W. Keefer, the diversion dam guy, to build this road, whoops, wrong one, build this bridge here. Now, this is the bridge that caused a jog in the street, Broadway. Broadway is right along here. I don't know if you can see, there are 3 wagons right there. And Broadway goes in this direction. In order to build a bridge, and this, I'm surmising this, it was probably easier to build a bridge in 2 sections, one over the wash, then over the island, and then over the deeper part of the channel, rather than building it over the whole river, the way they would have had to if they just extended Broadway. So Broadway came down here, moved over, came across the island and moved back. They call it the Broadway jog. A couple of things about this picture that I don't really know anything about. If anybody does, I'd be interested in talking to you. There are a couple of buildings on the island, and I haven't been able to find out at this particular point in time what those buildings were. However, local lore says that Keefer built a jail right near the Taylor Bridge. So one of those buildings could be the jail, but I have absolutely no idea. Anyway, the jail was not there very long. It was moved over to Capitol Avenue. And then the jailhouse that Keefer built became a house of ill repute. And the island became the red light district. of the village of Idaho. By this time, it was Idaho Falls. But at any rate, one other thing to notice is you can see right here in this bottom corner, it looks like the photographer is standing on a roof. And in fact, in the next picture, you will see the building on which he was standing, or she, right up in here. This is the first, as far as I know, the first commercial building on the west bank of the river. Once Kiefer built the bridge on these piers here, and we're going to keep referring back to these piers because they provide a good point of reference in the pictures. So by this time, that bridge that Kiefer built had been removed and they'd straightened Broadway out. The old mill was there, and it was probably the first commercial venture on the west side of the river, because nobody could live or nobody wanted to live on the west side of the river. They had to pay a toll every time they got into town. So once Kiefer built that bridge, then people at the west bank of the river started being developed. And this is another important building. This is the first power plant on the river, on the Snake River. The town switched its economy over to agriculture. They were bringing in people like these entrepreneurs from the west. And of course, they're bringing or from the east, right? They're bringing their families and so on. And at that point in time, there was electricity in the east. We didn't really have it out here at that point. And they were bringing the desire for electricity with them. So the city said, okay, we'll build a power plant. They built a small power plant on Pearl Creek, which was located where the corner of Boulevard and Elm Street is. In other words, where the roundabout is, that was where the first power plant was. But it was designed to only provide street lighting for the city, for the town. And that didn't go over well. People wanted lighting in their houses. And so they expanded, and it just wasn't enough. Finally, they got to the point where every house in the city could have one electric light bulb. And it could only be used from 4 till 10 at night. That probably went over like a lead balloon. And they had several arguments about doing it. I guess it was quite hard to actually get this up and running. But finally, in 1910, they had a vote and they voted to bring in the power plant. And this then became the first commercial power plant owned by a city in the state of Idaho. So we were pretty progressive at that point in time. Also, here's the railroad bridge again, and then here's the mill. So the mill was still there at that point. I wanted to show you this picture because this happened mostly every spring since there weren't dams or reservoirs on the Snake River. This is one of Kiefer's piers. Here's another one. And our Japanese garden sits right here. So we're hoping that the water master has learned all the lessons necessary to keep the water from ever coming up into the garden, but we'll see. Now, this is another interesting picture from 1933. You'll notice here the beginnings of the fish runs. By 1933, the Village Improvement Society that owned the island by that time had evicted the ladies of the night and turned the island over to the Sportsman Association, who wanted to build a fish hatchery there. That's the beginning of the fish hatchery. Here's Kiefer's Pier, the other one on the other side. In 1934, the Post Register, excuse me, Post Register was celebrating its 50th anniversary. It's possible that this bridge, this replica of the Taylor Bridge was built for that, but it's also possible that it was just an exercise. The, let's see, it's the division of the 100 of the, what is it, the F division of the 116th company of the Idaho National Guard built this. And I called and talked to the people there. They have no idea why this was built. It could have been just an exercise, you know, for the engineers to do this, because it was taken down almost immediately. Interesting thing about this, though, look at how low it is. And in comparison to Kiefer's Pier, you can understand why Taylor's first bridge went the first year. And this is the last of the history pictures. This is from about 1940, and here are the finished fish runs. This was in full production, raising trout to restock the rivers and streams in our area. But another interesting thing about this is right here are 4 cages, and they were built by the Sportsman on that island to be the first Idaho Falls Zoo. So it lasted quite a short time because Taufus Park took the animals over in 1935. But they left the cages, and then the Sportsman had a few things. I think they had some the wild game birds, and I think there was badger in there, and there were a few other things. But anyway, they were there. There are still features that we use today. These Y stairs are there. They're covered with vegetation. I don't know whatever happened back here. I don't know if that is another series of fish runs or whether it's something else. I haven't been able to pin down either what it was or when it was taken out, but it is no longer there. Now, things have changed, and there's a lot of soil that had been brought to the island, and so the island can support trees and support the garden as we know it today. In 2011, our sister city group here in Idaho Falls was about to celebrate the 30th anniversary of associating with our Japanese sister city, Tokai-Mura. And Tokai gave us this beautiful granite lantern that the city put on the north end of the island. But because of the flood of 1997, the whole bottom part of the island plantings that the city had put in, actually the Rotary Club had put in, were washed away. And the island was just allowed to go back to nature. So we have this beautiful lantern stuck on the one end of the island, and the rest of the island was overgrown with weeds and brush and trash and everything else. Clark Keto, Clark, raise your hand. Clark is a member of the sister city, and he came to the Master Gardeners. He decided that it would be a really wonderful idea if we could build a garden around this lantern given to us by our sister city. And so he came to Master Gardeners to ask us whether we were interested. Well, yes, we were definitely interested in doing that. So in March of that year, we organized and we appointed Mike Zaladonis as the garden designer. Mike, raise your hand. Mike's back. And we also had a steering committee appointed, and we had to get permission from the city to work on the island, remove stuff, the trash, clean things up. And we found out at that time that the city was not interested in giving us any monetary help with the garden. So they said, knock yourselves out, but don't come to us for money. Okay, then we decided that we could do that. The other thing is they warned us about project creep. They said we could have this lower part of the island from the front end of the island, that is the north end by the Broadway Bridge, back to the Taylor Bridge, which is less than a quarter of the island, to build our garden. And we were kind of disappointed. We really wanted to do something bigger than that, but that's what we got. So we said, okay, we'll be careful. And by the end of the summer, they had turned over the whole island to us. I said, okay, you know, you're doing a good job. Why? Go ahead. Just don't come to us for money. So, well, we tried. Now, the next series of photos are before and after pictures of what we have done. And first thing, most of the island looked like this. It was overgrown. There were a lot of years of winter debris in the water channels and so on. And that was the first thing we had to do. That first summer, we did a whole lot of cleaning up and hauling stuff out. And this is what that area looked like at several iterations. We went through a number of different sets of plants, and some of them survived and some of them didn't do so well. And so, but this is kind of what it looks like at this point in time. Here's one of our problems. We have beavers that come down the river. And that first March, when we were in there looking, we found that a beaver or beavers had taken out 12 saplings. And you can, oh, what happened? All right, you can see the white things in there, and there were a couple more in there. So whenever we plant a new tree, we have to protect it. And one of our big tree protectors is Hirsch. Hirsch, raise your hand. Back there, he does a lot of the building of the cages around the trees. There's another problem in here, and that is these yellow flags. We got them from a volunteer in Island Park, because that's the way we got our plants, was either from nursery donations or from the garden volunteers, donations from their garden. We got these. They're very common in Japanese gardens. They did beautifully here. But 3 years after we planted them, the state of Idaho declared them as a noxious weed. So we had to pull them all out. And we still occasionally find one that has bloomed. This summer, we found one that had apparently gone dormant for 10 years and then finally came back. The stairs, I think, probably were damaged badly by the flood in 1997. So there were about 10 of us. One day, I spent a whole day re-leveling the stairs and making sure that the risers were approximately the same height. Now, one of the big 3 essential elements in a Japanese garden is water. And we turned the water canals on for the first time during that summer, and 2 of the canals came together and flowed across this muddy area out into the river. In addition, the canals leaked. So we had a couple of big leaks also coming together in that area. And it formed a very large but shallow pond. So Mike said, let's build a stepping stone path. So here's our stepping stone path. And it crosses this area right about here. This particular stone is a really nice one to stand, turn to your left and look up at the shade garden that we planted there. Across that shallow pond, there was this wash that was filled with these large boulders. And while it was fun for the kids had a great time hopping over those boulders and climbing around. Not so much fun for the adults. So we removed a lot of the boulders, and then we built this offset bridge. Now, the offset bridge is common in Japanese gardens. And a lot of them have a lot more than just one little dog like ours does. they force people to slow down, pay attention to detail in the garden and so on. So that's nice for the contemplation. But another thing is in Japanese lore, evil spirits cannot travel except in straight lines. So if you cross the bridge, you're safe because they're not going to follow you. This was standing on the rock that I pointed out, looking back up, and this channel was just filled with junk. And so we spent a lot of time cleaning that out. And over on this side of it, you can't really see because the writing is covering that area, but we removed 14 giant trash bags full of daylilies. We have no idea what color the daylilies were because they never bloomed. It was in the shade. But we think the birds probably brought the seeds in. And so anyway, we cleaned them out, gave them to the city and then planted. And we planted water irises and the things that are listed over there. This is what the water channel looks like, looking back up the channel, and here's a little waterfall. There are 7 waterfalls in the park. Some of them you can't see unless you stand on the other side of the river and look back at the park. But this was the first area that we did and planted, and that was kind of what the city was convinced that we probably are going to do a pretty good job on this thing. Now, remember I said the city warned us about project creep? Well, this was a pretty big chunk of project creep. This was to the south of the Taylor Bridge. There's the Taylor Bridge right there. And Keenan, is that you, Keenan?
I'm not sure.
This one? I think that's Val in the background. Anyway, these were the old fish runs, and they were decayed badly. There were metal posts coming out of some of the cement, and the kids like to walk on them. It was a kind of a dangerous situation. We said, well, what are we going to do with this? We're not going to spend time carrying all that cement out of there. So we decided to cover it with a deck. And there were about 20 volunteers, and it took a whole weekend to make the deck because everything, the forms, all of the lumber, all of the equipment, everything had to be moved down from the upper level by hand. So it was a big job. And we left the front, one of the runs, there were 5 runs, we left this run uncovered. The Bonneville County Historical Society was really excited about leaving part of the Sportsman's Association history open so that people could see it. And so we left the front run, decided we were going to do this on the diagonal with redwood. You should have seen this thing when it was stained the first time. Bright red. It was so non-Asian, you know, as far as the garden was concerned, but it faded pretty quick. And that's the finished deck. You can see the water coming through the canal down here. It used to drop off into each of the runs from a water trough that came right along here. But we closed that off, and then the water came down through here, around the back end, and it forms one of the little waterfalls that goes into the river at that point. Another pretty big project was the garden gate. We started talking about the gate right off the bat, and the gate, notice, is on the upper level. So this is another example of project creep right away. We talked about the kind of gate, and I don't know if you know what I mean by a Tory gate, but they stand on a couple of posts, and then it has a top part that rounds up a little bit on the ends. And we thought that would be really cool. Well, it turns out that a Tory gate is a symbol of sacredness on the other side of the gate. And we decided we did not want to, offend any of our Japanese visitors by putting something there that we really didn't know what we're talking about. So we built a regular garden gate, and Edward built the gate. Edward, raise your hand. Edward built that gate, and here is Edward right here somewhere, right here. This was one of the big problems, a couple of big problems with the gate. But these posts are 12 foot tall and 12 inches by 12 inches, and they weighed a ton. The city they allowed us to use one of their Bobcats with a driver, and that was able to pick the big posts up and drop them into the appropriate holes. Now, the holes were another problem. You can't dig on that island with knowing for sure what you're gonna dig into because of all the rock. And in some places, the soil is 10 feet deep, and in some places it's 1.5 inches. So it was, basically, it was a crapshoot. We had no idea whether we were gonna be able to put our gate where we wanted to. But they decided where they wanted to put the gate, and a miracle occurred. We were able to dig 2 holes exactly where we needed to have them at the right depth, because you had to go down at least 3 feet, they told me. And it worked. So our gate was up. Before I will leave this picture, this area you see is grass. And by the end of that summer, there was no grass there because of all the people coming through. So, and with the city in the summer, when it gets really hot and it's 95 degrees, they water it 5 days a week. It's just a constant mud pit. So we decided we needed to do something about that. And in 2017, just before the eclipse, the guys got together and built this. It's one of my favorite things in there. It's a beautiful stone path. It's got some steps in it that are outlined in stones. And that was done, like, I think, 2 or 3 days before the eclipse. People started coming, so we're really happy about that. And this is the finished gate with the landscaping, the walkway, and so on. We have more landscaping that we put in over here. That's either here or there. Another big project was a settling pond for the fish hatchery. But Mike wanted to make a dragon's path across this pond. Now, a dragon's path is supposed to be a path of mystery and intrigue, and it is associated with water. So it was a nice idea. He wanted to get some millstones and put a path across this pond. Well, that was going to take a fair amount of structure underneath, because otherwise they were going to sink into the mud. So luckily, we had a fairly large crew of people that worked on this project. This also shows another one of our problems, and that's graffiti. We had fluorescent paint graffiti there, and then somebody wrote out the entire stanza of "You Are My Sunshine" on that pier. But luckily, Watts Steam Cleaning came in with their equipment, and they cleaned 100 years of graffiti off Kiefer's piers. It was amazing to watch, because they'd be spraying and the stuff's coming off, and another whole scene would appear. Spray that all off, and another whole scene would appear again. It was an amazing couple of days to see that. This is what the millstones looked like. Now, we didn't have real millstones, so we got a guy that worked with concrete build these things, and you can see how many of them they had to build here. And they were heavy as heck. So it was a good thing we had a large crew of people. These guys here in the fluorescent vests are from the county jail. they had a detail that would come out and work, and they had a supervisor right here, and they were really fun. I'm sure they were happy to be out and doing something constructive and whatnot, but anyway, they helped us with several projects in the garden. And that's basically what the millstones look like today, although we can't keep plants and we can't keep fish in this pond because it drains, it's got a correct base. And so we just let it drain in the water, and then we replant, and sometimes we replant the same things. These are papyruses. We've got some cattails in here. There's some Japanese arrowhead, and there's also, I'm not sure I see any at this point in time, but there were yellow flag irises in there, which of course we had to pull out. Now we've planted these versicolor irises in the pond and in some of the waterways, and I love them. I think they're gorgeous. The lower path, this is gonna go fast. This was basically a cleanup job. We did the rope and post fences along there. And there was a hillside over here that was overgrown to the max, and so we had to clean that off, and this is what the hillside looks like today. Here's Hirsch, our tree person back there, and Wendy, another one of the Master Gardener volunteers. The upper level had the gate on it, but that was it, and it was kind of blocked. So we decided we needed to put in a planting bed and a bamboo fence. That fence was not exactly safe and secure for anything, so we thought we'd put in bamboo. And that was a big project. Dick, I think that's you. Right there. And over here, I think that's you again. Some of the volunteers, these two were members of the sister cities, and the others, these two ladies are master gardeners. They had to lug these trees around and dig the trees and removed blocks, and it was a long 2 days for 10 of us who worked on this in 95-degree heat in July. That was not fun, but it's done, and I love it. It turned out very nice. Fence is not up. We started building the bamboo fence, so we were going to build these panels. Each of the panels have 22 bamboo pickets to it, and we built 50 panels. And in Japan, they would tie the pickets to the structure that they were doing. So we knew that that was not going to be really very sturdy for a public park where there's no supervision of people in there. And so we screwed the bamboo to the structure and then tied over the top of it. 2,550 knots. And when it's up, it's really good. Now, the third essential element of a Japanese garden is plants. And I want to say one thing about these plants. We tried as best we can to mimic what they do in Japan. However, Japan is a maritime climate with acid soil, and we're a high desert plateau with alkaline soil. And a lot of times it just doesn't work. So we can't grow azaleas, which are very common in Japanese garden. We have substituted this plant, which is a Weijia. And it has done beautifully. And in the spring and June, it's just gorgeous. And I love the fence. But it does take some work. Now, the biggest part, the biggest building project of the garden was the pavilion. And Edward is kind of the garden builder par excellence. He designed it, put it in this particular spot. This is where the pavilion is located. And here is the finished product. I think this was actually taken a couple of years ago. It was a very pretty day. But that roof is 8,000 pounds of tile from Japan. So that was quite the job. And Edward taught himself Japanese building techniques and used them whenever he could. So it's as authentic as we can make it here. And this was taken this spring. I wanted to put this one in because we have this Sistina plum right in front of that building. And the plum in Japanese lore is a sign of renewal. It comes early in the spring and so on. So it's an appropriate place for our pavilion. In front of the pavilion is a Zen garden. A Zen garden is rocks and stones. And it's supposed to symbolize the permanence of mountains and rocks. And we have, there was a while where Edward was wrecking this quite often, but unfortunately, we do not have a culture where parents are keeping their children out of this. And so it's raked, and then 5 minutes later, there's some little kid in there throwing rocks around. So we don't rake it as much as we would like, and I'm hoping that, like some of the other features of Japanese gardens, our town is getting more used to this, and they are respecting the traditional etiquette of the Japanese garden. Now, these are much smaller projects, but they add a lot to the garden. This area, over here is the grassy lower area. And unfortunately, because of the leaks in the waterways, it would become a swamp in July and August. And so we tried to fix some of the waterways for the first 4 years, and we finally said, forget this. We're just gonna incorporate whatever water comes out of those waterways into our landscape. So they dug a trench across the grassy area. Mike built a little bridge there that has a little bit of a curve to it, which is really cool. And we landscaped the area with rocks and grass. There's coney grass, smoke bush, and there's some bamboo. And it's just a nice little feature that keeps the water off the grass. This area is very difficult. We haven't really been able to come up with a good thing to do here because the Taylor Bridge shadows everything. And we did plant this in this bowl here. It gets enough sun, but most of the rest of the stuff that we planted there has died. We'll keep going. There's a bamboo lattice work there for some interest, and Dick helped us with that too. This is Mike's work. He was raised in Idaho Falls, and he'd watched this bush for a long time. He told me every time I'd go by it, I really want to prune it because he knew that this was underneath. So starting the Japanese garden gave him the chance to prune it. And then we put this big stone in, and the stone says friendship. Gotta have benches in the garden. We've got two different kinds. There's a stone bench like this, and there's several new benches. And Claudia, back here in the yellow, and her neighbor have built a couple of new benches. They're going in next week. So that's great. This bench got put in there, and immediately there was a man that spent the entire summer sitting on that bench with his computer writing. I said he was writing a great American novel, and he said he was writing a novel. So this is a Sukubai arrangement. They are a place where you wash your hands and mouth out. It's a ritual cleansing. area, and Japanese gardens tend to have that. A garden club in town, gave us money for cherry trees. We wanted a cherry tree lane. So we've got this, and they've gotten to the point where they're big enough now where we can actually feel like it's an actual cherry tree lane. That was this spring. And this you don't find in a Japanese garden in Japan. But the city of Idaho Falls decorates the garden at Christmas time with literally tens of thousands of lights. And I know because in the spring, we're picking up strings of lights and extension cords for months because they can't find them all when they look. But it's really a lovely way of celebrating the season. So those are the slides of the things that we've done. I want to quickly run through future projects. We've got several people who are planning to donate another cherry tree, so we're going to expand that. We have to have new signs. The signs are just falling apart. We took them down. They're ready to go. They're going back up next week. We want to do some new landscaping on the railroad hill. We don't have a whole lot of red color in the fall. And so we would like to get the underbrush cleaned out there, and the city is planning on our big project there. Don't have time to talk about that. We want a safety rail right here. These steps are old and they're kind of treacherous. They're a little wobbly. So we'd like to get a mason in there and have them take care of that. Edward wants to build an Obadon path. Now, this is not necessarily the way the path will look right here, but this is an example. An Obadon path, it has rock slabs and rocks and whatnot, and it would go along this pathway that is, people have gotten rid of the grass there for us, so we're all ready to go. And it will go back to the lantern back here. I don't know if you can see that. There's a ramp to the lower level, and once that's finished, I'm looking forward to doing some landscaping in this area. We haven't done much of anything in that part of the garden. Here are some of the benches, and Claudia and her neighbor Bart, they brought that bench in. One of our benches just kind of rotted away last winter. So they made some new benches for us. Got the same problem with some of the posts and rope fences. We've got to fix those. And we have to repair the waterways. Now that's going to be a city project. We just don't have the expertise to do that, or the desire actually to do it. But at any rate, if anybody is interested in helping, I have cards that I will give you that have my contact information on it. And we'd love to have you. If you know, if anybody decides they want to do it, why come on over. This, by the way, oops, I think I did it. Yeah, well, it's up there, but it's not up there. Anyway, no matter, the white bush was the Idaho flower, not orange. And it smells so good in June when it's blooming. June is an absolutely gorgeous time in the garden. Does anybody have any questions?
Can I add a few comments?
I'm sorry, what?
Can I add a few comments?
No, absolutely.
We were talking about the red light district being on the island. Well, the man had to pay a tax to the city, and it was called,
The soil growth.
yeah, soil growth tax that the city paid.
First, remember when it was there.
And then also, where the south deck is now, if you look right straight across, you can see where the discharge came from that, grain mill. It's up there. You can see it. And also right there, Mr. Kiefer, his brother built the first, information center. It was all out of ladder rock. And it was all done around the 30s. And another thing, it was right where the deck is.
Hirsch is a member of the Bonneville County Historical Society.
And, I checked with the zoo also, when you were talking about the cages, they don't have any idea what animals were or were not there. So they tried. They haven't been able to find anything. And then the swinging bridge that you didn't show, that is actually how they got most of the dirt through the thirties across the river. And that swinging bridge was always a thing to do for the teenagers, to get their girlfriends to walk up there with them on the swinging bridge to get it going.
Oh, yeah.
And then they give it a sneak kiss.
The swinging bridge is famous.
Swinging bridge terminated, isn't it?
Yeah.
Before I forget, and before anybody has any more questions or comments, would everybody who has worked in the garden please raise their hand? So, yeah. So, thank you all for the help that you give to us for the garden. Yes,
Well, in my lifetime, one of the buildings was a monkey cage.
in,
Monkey cage.
No, I can remember.
I know that there were animals there. And I know that there was a bear and a badger and some other things, but I don't know anything about.
After the, up in the upper deck area, Hirsch was talking about at the garden, there's a wood deck at the top. And where that is now was the Kiefer's Visitor Center. And then they moved that to where the public could get easier access to it. And since it was empty, Kiefer put stuffed animals in there. And a monkey may well have been in there. I don't remember ever seeing a live monkey down there. Saw fish. I saw stuffed animals.
Other comments or questions?
There's a little rock building, kind of like a museum.
Well, that was a visitor center, the lava rock building, that
Did
became,
that.
or a taxidermy display when he wanted to open it.
A
Cheryl,
lot of the animals are here in the museum now. The taxidermy things.
Yeah, well, he had a house on 16th Street. And, he had the whole house, all stuffed animals. Part of his taxidermy business.
Cheryl, did you have a comment?
Yes, Judy makes, Judy makes it sound like there are lots of volunteers. I think half of them are in his room. And that the people probably assume that the city helps out financially a lot. And neither of those statements are true. We are short on volunteers and short on funds. And so we accept, how can they,
We, in all fairness, the city does not, well, they say we're a line item in their budget, but I've never seen it. But the thing is that when we need their help with the Bobcat, well, they do cut the grass most of the time. But our money has come from grants and from donations from people, primarily. And so we're very thankful that people donate to the garden, because there's always stuff that we have to buy, fertilizer, slug bait. We always need slug bait. It's just such a moist environment down there that the slugs look at all the hostas and just think, this is a salad bar. And I mean, they just chew everything to pieces. So at any rate, well,
Oh, I must also say Judy was giving credit to all the volunteers, but I remember when you took this on as a possible 2-year master gardener project for your accreditation, and you're still there. What year was that?
2011.
Tim remembers, so lots of credit to you.
okay, well, it's been a labor of love. I have to say, it's annoying sometimes when you go down there and you find somebody has thrown artificial flower petals everywhere. And before you can ever start doing anything, you need to pick up all those flower petals, because they get in the waterways, they get in between the rocks, and then they look like a pebble. So we pick them up. I mean, there's just all kinds of little things like that that people don't think about. But it takes time and it takes effort. And if it wasn't for everybody, we couldn't do it. There's just no way. And the city can't do it either because for a variety of reasons. Number one, they keep getting more park area, but no more funding. That's one thing. So they're always strapped with cash. And then during the pandemic, I remember I asked how their hiring for their summer employees was coming. And they usually hired like 75 people during the summer for summer employees. They had hired 16 people. 16. You can't keep the parks in this city up with 16 people. So, anyway.
How often do you all meet and work at the garden?
And people can go whenever they want. And there's a group of us that go on Wednesday mornings. And the later into the summer it gets, the earlier we go. Because it's pretty much on that time. But there's no set time. That's one of the nice things as far as the master gardeners are concerned. If they want to do the garden, they basically pick out an area of the garden to be their own plot, and then they can do it whatever time they want. However, they need to get a little bit of instruction before we sort of let them go in there. Make sure that, you know, they know what we want them to do, and they know what plants are plants and what are weeds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, anything else? Clark?
If I could just share a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a member of the Adult Sister Cities. And so in 2015, our group went to Tokai-Mura, had a great time. Their group came up to Idaho Falls in 2012. Actually, they came at the same time when we dedicated the Friendship Garden to everyone. And so the folks in Japan were very impressed by that. They came back again in 2012. That was 1 year after the earthquake, tsunami, all of that disaster. But the 2011 was the kind of the initial start of the Friendship Garden. And at the time, we also had different ideas of what to do to kind of show our respect to the Japanese culture. We did not want to just make it a kind of a token effort. We wanted to do something that respects the culture, especially with our interaction of sister city exchange between Idaho Falls and Tokai-Mura. And that also being the lantern and a few of the other gifts that they provided to us. So when they arrived in 2014, Edward had already started putting in the foundation, some of the structure for the pavilion. And so the guests from Japan looked at that and they actually went around and actually examined it, took pictures of themselves around it. And I think they were very impressed. So I don't know exactly, but I think when they returned back to Japan, they told their community and the mayors and the city council, we have a Japanese style garden in honor of Tokai-Mura, and it is called the Friendship Garden. When we went to Japan in 2015, we went to their sister city hall, and they have a wooded area around their area, and they call that the Friendship Woods. And so when we went there, and there's some pictures here, we stood by with their delegation and our delegation to commemorate their Friendship Woods. And there's a sign here that shows that. And so it kind of brings that all full circle. They were initiated the Friendship Garden Exchange, and we respect them back with the Friendship Garden. And so it's a very collaborative arrangement. So I'll be.
Friendship Woods is a Tokai-Mura city, it's a building, gathering building, but it's designed, it looks like an American house on the outside. And on the inside, it looks like a couple large rooms in an American house. That's where they have all their functions get together and things. So, and they also put a lot of American stuff. Yeah.
Very good. I think we're done. Well, thank you so much, Judy. Really appreciate it. Thank you.